Good evening, everybody. What a wonderful crowd. We're so glad to see you all, especially all those who are from outside our community. Welcome. Thank you for coming. We are so blessed here to have some really amazing people in our community. And tonight we're going to hear from one of our stars. Yeah, I need my intro. Oh, so just a few housekeeping things. So you came through the double doors. If you go out those doors, there are bathrooms immediately on the right-hand side. And then if you need some water, there's a drinking fountain out towards the front door. Oh, you've got, okay. Okay, so we do have some tea and water and some cookies back there. And more at intermission. Okay. Our speaker tonight is Claire Palmerino. Claire earned a doctorate in experimental psychology at UCLA in 1979. So she is Dr. Claire Palmerino. She spent her academic career at California State University, Fullerton, teaching such classes as Introduction to Statistics, Introduction to the Scientific Method, Critical Thinking, and the Psychology of Learning and Memory, all fairly left-brain fields of study. So can we have you do a class for us on critical thinking? That might be worthwhile. After retiring in 2012, she began exploring several right-brained interests such as Reiki, healing touch, and more recently, mediumship. Claire says that when she taught at the university, she had a reputation for making dry and boring subjects interesting. And the reason why she always made them interesting is that she comes with great passion and a love for whatever she's doing. So without further ado, please welcome Claire Palmerino. And I guess I didn't introduce myself. I'm Reverend Jerry, for anybody that doesn't know me.
Well, good evening. It's so nice to see everybody here. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to share this long-time interest of mine, and that is the...
Please turn off your phones.
Oh, and that is the study, the research, the evidence for the continuity of consciousness. Now, I think you may have seen the original title was a little heady, so I changed it to Continuity of Consciousness, just like that. And we're going to talk about 3 lines of evidence that indicate that we exist prior to birth and that we continue to exist after death. So we're going to go on quite a journey tonight. And I didn't practice doing this, so I don't need to do the introduction because Jerry did my fine introduction for me. I think the first thing we need to do is get some definitions, get on the same wavelength as to what we're talking about. So when we think about consciousness, we're talking about the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition. It's the quality or state of being aware, especially of something within oneself. And I would add that consciousness carries a continuation of awareness. So when we have our earliest memories, we experience those memories as that same person throughout our lives. And so that includes our personality selves, it includes our history, it includes our experiences and our experience of that self. Okay. But some other words we might use that would carry the same meaning might be mind, it could be self, identity, personality, and we are aware, very much aware. We have that inner observer that can hear thoughts. Have you ever had the experience of going, oh, I'm thinking something that I'm not sure I agree with, right? Right? So before I launch into the actual lines of evidence, though, I also want to set the stage with some assumptions about consciousness. Because the assumptions we bring to something really shape the way we see it. If we are looking at research from one angle and one set of assumptions, we're going to come to different conclusions than if we look at it from another angle. So the questions that I'm going to ask to help us get to our assumptions are, what is the source of our consciousness and where is it located? Okay, so now the typical medical personnel or someone from the scientific community is going to say, well, it's obvious the source of our consciousness is the brain matter. That consciousness arises from the white matter, the gray matter of our brain, the neural connections, the neurons, etc. And so it's obviously located in the brain. This is called the materialist hypothesis, because frankly, there is not really much hard evidence that matter can produce consciousness. The alternative way to think about this is to make an assumption that the source of our consciousness is outside the physical body, and that the location of that consciousness is a field around that includes the body. Now that seems pretty strange, doesn't it? I mean, how do you get your head around that? But there's a really simple way to kind of come to think about this. Think about your TV. Is the picture in the TV? Is the TV show in the TV? No. The TV is the device through which input creates an image where we experience the TV. So if I smash the TV, what creates the picture? I mean, the TV is the mechanism for the picture to be displayed, but where does the image come from? It comes from a radio signal or a direct TV signal, or, now I'm getting above my head in terms of what my technical expertise, but it comes from a signal of some sort, an input of some kind. And so if I smash the TV, have I damaged the ability to see the TV program? Yeah. But have I destroyed the signal? No, because the signal is not in the TV. So we can think about consciousness in the same way, that the brain is the receiver of conscious input. And when you have traumatic injury to the brain, yes, you see a decline in what appears to be conscious awareness. But it doesn't destroy the signal, the input of consciousness. And so I would call this the non-local hypothesis. And that's what many people, it's not my own personal title, it's what many people call it, the non-local consciousness, because it seems to be everywhere all at once. And you have capabilities. This is the hypothesis that can readily embrace things like remote viewing, telepathy, other ways, other experiences that are outside of the normal human experience. Okay. So tonight we're going to look at 3 lines of evidence. We're going to look at the memories of past lives in very young children. I'm very excited about this line of evidence. It's very interesting and incredibly surprising to me when I first heard about it. We're going to look at near-death experiences, and then we're going to explore, we'll take a break, and then we'll explore after-death communication. So the field of research that looks at the spontaneous memories of very young children who remember their past lives was started by Dr. Ian Stevenson. And he was a psychiatrist with a research interest in psychosomatic medicine. But he began to hear of these cases of very young children, like we're talking 2, 3 years old, making a variety of very specific statements about a past life. So these are not children that had gotten a hypnotic regression. There's no facilitation of their memory. It's just spontaneous statements that the child makes. And in many of these cases that he found, the child gave enough information, specific information, that they were able to identify who the previous personality was. Who was that person they claimed to remember being? So at the time, he was the chair of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Virginia, but due to a huge donation and grant, he was able to establish the Division of Perceptual Studies, which is an academic unit devoted to studying extraordinary experiences. And so if I refer to that, I'll call it DOPS, the Division of the Division of Perceptual Studies. Okay, so Dr. Stevenson retired in the late 80s, and Dr. Jim Tucker, who was also a psychiatrist, specifically as specializing in child psychiatry, became his successor and is currently the director of DOPS. And he is on YouTube. There's many, many YouTubes with Jim Tucker. And if you have any interest in this, I would really encourage you to find him, because he is the quintessential academic. Very bland. He speaks very carefully. He often says, alleged past lives, that kind of thing. So but he's very thorough. He looks like a very kind man. He's very good at connecting with children, because the child really does need to be comfortable with a person to begin talking about what they are remembering. Oh. Did I go too far? There we go. Okay. So I thought we would start by having a description of kind of the broad strokes of what this looks like with young children. So they're usually between the ages of 2 and 5 when they begin making statements that refer to a past life. And these children tend to be very verbal. So at 2 years old, some children are hardly speaking by then. But these children are quite verbal, and they're able to tell amazingly specific things, and I'll get into that. But these children often display unusual behaviors. They have particular preferences, and they often have phobias that are related to the manner of death in the previous life. So just some lingo. If I say the previous personality, I'm referring to the person who died and whose memories are being experienced by the child, okay? So in some of these cases, so for example, a young girl who reported that she had been hit by a bus and then was knocked into a rice paddy and drowned, from an early age on, she was terrified of water. It would take 2 or 3 adults to hold her down just to give her a bath. And she was terrified of buses and trucks. So it's a very interesting phenomenon that these children often have these kinds of behaviors. The preferences are interesting as well. Dr. Stevenson did some of his work in the country of Burma. And in Burma, they were occupied by the Japanese during World War II, and many Japanese soldiers were killed during that occupation time. And a number of years later, there was kind of a rash of children in Burma reporting that they were Japanese soldiers. They insisted that they were Japanese, and they didn't want anything to do with the spicy food of Burma. They wanted raw fish. Okay, and so this is kind of an interesting pattern that took place in Burma at that time. In the lingo of this research, we call it a solved case if the previous personality has been identified. Sometimes the child is not able to give enough information for the identification of the past life. But I do want to say that, then that's the next bullet. Typically, children report relatively ordinary lives. These children are not saying that they were Cleopatra or, Caesar. They're reporting the life of a little girl in a unexceptional village in India, 100 miles away. That's the typical case. The other thing is that the children report relatively recent past lives. So their past lives are not taking place in ancient Greece or during the time of humankind exploring across the ocean. They're relatively recent lives. So that's kind of different than what most people think about when they think about reincarnation. Currently, there's over 2,500 of these cases in the DOPS database. And these cases are each coded for over 200 variables. And so that means, since it's a database, they can look at patterns, looking at just the children who report being dying with unnatural causes or by natural causes, et cetera. Okay. So, let's see. Here are some, these are very generic. I'll get into more interesting specific statements in a bit. But these are the kinds of statements children start saying. You're not my mommy. I have another daddy. When I was big, I used to have blue eyes. Now I have brown eyes. That happened before I was in mommy's tummy. Those are the kinds of things that they're saying. And can you imagine having your child say something like this? It would be very disconcerting, wouldn't it? It would be like, what is going on? With it? There was one little boy who, he was about 2, and his father was changing his diaper. And the little boy looked up at him and very clearly said, when I was your age, I changed your diaper. And then he went on to tell about characteristics and experiences that his father's father had had. One time, the father brought a bunch of photographs from his mother's house that the family had not seen before. And as the little boy looked at them, he said, "Oh, that's me." And then he saw a picture of the grandfather's car, just the car, there was nobody in it, and he said, "That's my car." So it's this kind of startling. I just often just get the shivers thinking what I would have done if one of my children had begun making these kinds of statements. I don't want to go there yet. Okay, so in these 2,500 cases in the DOPS database, some of them are what we would call weak cases. They're not particularly evidential and demonstrative that the child is truly remembering a past life, because the statements are general, like maybe the child's reporting a life that sounds like it might be from the 1970s, and the child says, "Yeah, I used to drive a car." Well, everybody drives a car. There's no way to verify that who this past personality would be. That would be a weak case. Then there are cases that you would maybe characterize as moderately strong. They're moderately strong because there are possible alternative explanations that could be ventured that would speak that they're not really remembering a past life. For example, the child just heard about this relative, and that's why they've just taken this fantasy that they are that relative. Or perhaps there's no written record of the statements the child makes, and then the family thinks they find the previous personality. But then once you know the information about the previous personality, if you don't have a written record of the statements, it could be that your memory of the statements got shaded by the information you learned about the previous person, right? So let's say the previous personality went to Europe and saw the Eiffel Tower. Well, if the child had said, "I went across the ocean," you could then say, "Oh, yeah, that means he went to Europe," right? But it could be a different ocean. He could have gone to Hawaii, right? So it's that kind of thing that it allows a really strong skeptic to say, "Well, wait a minute, there's another way to explain this information." But then we go to the strong cases. And the elements of a strong case include these kinds of things. The child's statements are documented while they're happening. It's not recalling what the child said, but the mother or the father is writing down in a journal or emailing the statements to themselves that create a written record or a video record, something that they can go back to and say, yes, this is what he said, and compare it then when the previous personality is identified. The statements the child makes are varied. They talk about a lot of different things, and they're specific. So they're specific like, when I was big, I had a store, and I sold grape juice. You know, I mean, he would be able to say what it was that he did as at an occupation. When I died, I was shot with a gun. You know, it's very specific. The previous personality is unrelated to the child's family. So we have many cases where it's a grandchild that seems to remember being the grandfather. But in cases where there's no connection between the families, it minimizes the chances that the child has heard about this previous personality and is just pretending to be that previous personality. And then once the previous personality is identified, all or most of the statements made prior can be validated. And that's the exciting part, to see just how much match there is between what the child says early on and then how that corresponds to the previous personality's life. The final element of a really strong case is when the child is able to pick out in a lineup, if you will, individuals who were important in the previous personality's life. So, for example, they might be able to pick out their daughter. They would say, there was one little girl who she was about 5 years old. This is a case in India. And she was about 5 years old, and she began talking about her previous life. Actually, let me back up. The first thing that she did, she was about 18 months or 2 years old. Her first words, she picked up a telephone and she said, "Hello, Lila? Lila. Hello, Lila." And she was urgent. It felt urgent to the parents that she needed to talk to Lila. They had no idea who Lila was. Okay, so then as she began to tell more and more about her past life, they were able to identify, and one of the things the little girl said was, "I have a husband and 3 daughters." And when they found the previous personality, that was true. She had 3 daughters, one of which was named Lila, and she was, at that point, I don't remember the other 2 girls' names, but she was able to give the other 2 girls' names. Now, what was interesting about the telephone call was that this woman died in undergoing heart surgery. And just before she went into surgery, she was desperately trying to contact her daughter, Lila. But the phone communication was staticky and they couldn't hear each other. "Hello, Lila, Lila." That was the memory that came through so strongly. And this little girl was able to, when they got the families together, and she was with now these grown daughters, and by the way, she was absolutely in love with her husband and was heartbroken when she found out that he had remarried. She called him every day on the phone, and she loved him, and she related to him not like a little girl to a stranger, but she related to him as if he were her lover. I mean, she wanted to be next to him, and she required that the daughters call her mother and treat her with respect. You know, that's the kind of thing that how it plays out, because these children don't just pretend. They have the energy and the persona of this previous person. So some other interesting patterns that come out of the DOPS database, I find this really fascinating. 70% of the children who report past lives report dying from unnatural means. So murder, suicide, accidents like drowning. 70%, big. I mean, I don't know what the general population percentage is, but you know it's not 70% of us die of unnatural means, right? Now, hang in for me with this, because this is really, I'm going to drill down to that a little bit. More boys report past lives than girls, and this is kind of a curious finding. Why would more boys remember than girls? Well, when they did the data mining, when they did the statistical work, they found, okay, so we've got 70% of the children who report dying of unnatural causes. That means 30% report dying of natural causes, some kind of disease process, heart attack, stroke, whatever. If you look at just the 30% that die of natural causes, the gender distribution between the children are 50-50 male and female. But when you look at the 70% of those who report dying of unnatural causes, then you get this huge disparity, way more boys than girls. Okay, so now that kind of makes sense, does it? Because boys and men are much more likely to engage in risky behavior. Okay, so that kind of makes sense. But to make it even more interesting, if you look at like 5 years of data of US deaths, and you just look at the unnatural deaths, which is going to be a very small portion, hopefully, a small portion of our population that die unnatural deaths, the ratio of male to female in that portion, 72% male. So it perfectly aligns with the findings in the DOPS pattern. So I just think that's really striking. If these children were just making this up, you wouldn't see this kind of matching. You wouldn't see this disparity of boys and girls. I mean, it's just a really very interesting, that's the kind of data that gets me excited. Okay. All right. So going on to some of the other patterns, the average interval between the death of the previous personality and the birth of the child is 4.5 years, which feels like that's pretty fast. I mean, we usually think of reincarnation as like giving people some time to recuperate from the last life. Now, I don't know if you remember your statistics class. What's the difference between an average and a median? Okay, well, I'll tell you. I won't keep you in suspense. The average, of course, is all of the cases divided by the number that you have. Pretty much everybody's familiar with the average. The median is that point in the data distribution where 50% of the cases are above and 50% of the cases are below. So in this case, the median is only 16 months. That means 50% of the cases are shorter than 16 months, and 50% of the cases are longer than 15 months, or 16 months. And I got to thinking about that. Why would that be? And I think it's because when you do the average, there are some cases in the database where the interval is 30, 40, 50 years. And so that lifts the average up, but it doesn't impact the median. So in this case, the median is actually a more informative statistic. And then the average age when the statements begin to emerge is about 35 months, or roughly 3 years. But they start, that's the average. They can start as early as 18 months, 2 years old. Okay. So there's some more patterns. Most children display significant emotion as they describe their memories. And the stronger the case, the more emotion is apparent. So when we have a case where the child is remembering very strong past life memories, they're remembering who they were, where they lived, how they made their living, how they died, all these things, that's the strong case, and there's more emotion involved in it. They're pining, they're yearning for their previous families. They say, what am I doing here? I belong on the island off the Sea of Scotland. I don't belong here. Some children can access these memories at any time. Other children have to be in a very relaxed state. When they're not in a relaxed state, they tend not to have any feeling or thought about the past life. Interestingly, children tend to stop talking about the past life when they reach about age 6 or 7. And it seems to be that's when they begin to kind of engage in life outside of the home. They're going to school, they're getting involved in activities like sports or, Girl Scouts, Cub Scouts. And so their current personality life is taking more and more hold, and they begin to release and let the memories of the past life fade. Most of the statements they make when they're actively reporting their past lives are about the events and the people that were toward the end of the previous personality's life, if that makes sense as well. 20% of the cases, the children talk about life between lives. And they report some interesting things. 35% of the cases, the children show an intense fear of the mode of death. And we already talked about the phobia that might be associated with a phobia of water if the child died of drowning. And then psychological testing on these children show them to be pretty normal kids. They're not prone to psychological disturbances. The only thing that makes them stand out is that they tend to be brighter than the average child and much more verbal. Okay, there's an error on this slide. I was like horrified when I looked at my slides this afternoon. The book, it says Birthmarks in Biology by Dr. Ian Stevenson. That's not correct. It's Reincarnation and Biology. So just have to correct that. And also the name of the little boy, Ryan Holland, it's Ryan Hammonds. I don't know where my head was when I typed that PowerPoint yesterday. But let's talk about this very curious finding about birthmarks. Dr. Ian Stevenson, in his book Reincarnation and Biology, it's a 2,000-page tome. It's published in 2 volumes because it's 2,000 pages you can't fit into one book. And in that book, he described 200 cases of children who displayed birthmarks associated with an injury and often the fatal wound of the previous personality. Yeah, let that sink in. Let that sink in. In 20 of the cases, there were actually 2 birthmarks. And in these cases, the previous personality was shot and killed, and there was a birthmark at the entry point of the bullet and at the exit point of the bullet. Not only do they have the report of the children that this took place, but when the previous personality was identified, they found autopsy records, they found crime scene photos, and they could show there was a correspondence between the placement, the size, the shape of these birthmarks to the fatal wound in the previous personality. Pretty amazing, huh? Yeah. Dr. Stevenson had a hypothesis about this. Of course, remember his specialty before he got sucked into this work was studying the psychosomatic medicine. And so he really had a deep appreciation for just how much our minds can impact the body. So his hypothesis was that this consciousness that was now occupying a new body that had had this recent trauma, that consciousness would be remembering that trauma, and the thoughts that associated with that trauma would then impact the developing fetus. That was his working theory. There's no proof of it, but it's an interesting theory. And then we have experimental birthmarks. Has anybody heard of experimental birthmarks? Okay, with experimental birthmarks, it happens in cultures that have a strong belief in reincarnation, and they want to be able to identify who grandma is coming back as, right? And so they will make what they call an experimental mark on the corpse. So often they use chalk or they use soot, and they'll just make a stripe down the back of the neck, or they'll make a couple of lines on the lower calf of the leg. And then when a child is born with that mark, they go, ah, grandma's back. Now, in this book, Reincarnation and Biology, Dr. Stevenson was able to report on 20 cases of experimental birthmarks. And since then, Dr. Tucker has found 18 more cases. So interesting. Now that doesn't carry emotion. That there's not, we talked about his theory about how this traumatic event could impact the fetus. The experimental birthmarks doesn't lend credence to that. So who knows what's going on there? Okay. So enough with the dry stuff. Well, for now. I'll be bringing some dry stuff back. But I want to talk about a very strong American case. There's actually two that are quite famous. The first one I elected not to talk about because I feel like chances are many of you might have heard of him. How many of you have heard of James Leninger, the little boy that remembered being the World War II pilot? Yeah, that's a really it's a popular one for people to talk about, and it's pretty remarkable. But the case, so I elected not to talk about that one, hoping that I can bring you something new and different. And so Dr. Tucker calls this the boy who remembered Hollywood. And this is a very strong case. It starts out strong because the mother contacted Dr. Tucker early on. Little boy began remembering his past life when he was 5 years old. And he was born in 2004. He started remembering in 2009, the fall of 2009, and then in February of 2010, his mother contacted Dr. Tucker. And she sent him all of the statements that this little boy Ryan had made so far. And then every couple of weeks, she would update Dr. Tucker with more emails. Well, now this is what he said today. So we have this written record there's no idea who the previous personality is at this point, and that's that really important element of a strong case. So the family in this case is from the Midwest, from the heartland of our country. They're from Warner, Oklahoma, not a place where the word reincarnation probably comes up very often. And both the mother and the father, Cindy and Kevin, were raised in Christian homes and had no idea, no knowledge, no belief in reincarnation at all. In fact, the father was adamantly opposed to the idea that it was possible his son was reporting a past life. As things unfolded, his position began to change. I want to read to you Cindy's own account of how it all started, because I think she really did a good job. I've taken this from the book Surviving Death. Ryan had told me one night that he had a secret, and he was pretty sure he wasn't supposed to tell. He knew that he used to be somebody else. And he used to be rich and had lived in a big house that had been full of children. In fact, he had had 3 boys. Now, he didn't think those boys were his, but no one else could give them a name, so he did. He had been in the movies, and he had driven a green car. He went to fancy parties with the cowboy man, little boy said. I went to fancy parties with the cowboy man, the guy that had a horse who did tricks. And this man was his buddy, and he was also in the movie. The cowboy had also done all of those cigarette commercials. Now, this is in 2009. There were no cigarette commercials on TV in 2009. I don't know when they made that illegal. Was that like 80s or something? But I just want you to imagine how disconcerting it would be to have your 5-year-old speak clearly about a time and a place that's so different from the home he knew. What 5-year-old knows about cigarette commercials? This would get your attention. Yeah. So she began doing research online about children who have these odd memories. And one of the things she found was a suggestion that if you show the child pictures or books about the location and the place that he or she is remembering, it can sometimes comfort them and soothe them. And so she began bringing books about Hollywood home. And Ryan enjoyed looking at them. Well, one day, as they paged through a photo book of old Hollywood movies, Ryan got excited and he pointed to a picture and he said, "Mama, you found me. You found me. That's George, and we did a picture together." And the credit under the photo identified this movie as Night After Night with George Raft and Mae West. It was her debut film. Now, the mother, whose name is Cindy, went on YouTube and she was able to find a video of that old movie, Night After Night, and she watched it beginning to end. She saw the scene that the photo came from, and the actor who played that, who was that extra, had no lines, and there was no mention of him in the credits. So there was no way to find out who this unnamed extra actor was. And as the weeks went by, little Ryan began to remember more and more about his previous life. And the small things that he remembered seemed to comfort him. Things like, I got my daughter a watchdog, and she didn't like it, but I liked it. I used to go to fancy parties and dance with pretty women. Those things brought him some comfort and calm. But then there were other big things that haunted him, like what had happened to the children. He remembered being a father to all these children, and now he's in a different place, a different time, and doesn't know what happened to them. What happened to his mother? He knew what she looked like, but he couldn't remember her name. He knew he had a daughter, wanted to know what happened to her, and these memories gave him pain because he was worried about them. He felt an emotional connection with these other people. Sometimes Ryan would come into his parents' bedroom in the middle of the night saying his chest hurt and he was gasping for air. Much later, they learned that the previous personality died of a heart attack. Now, bath time before bed became a dreaded ritual because that's when he got relaxed, that's when the memories started to surface. And Cindy says he became a different person. He just became a different person. And there were nights when he was really funny, and she really enjoyed hearing his stories about this pretty interesting life. But other nights, it was like he was mad at the world. He would rant and rave, "Why can't you just take me to Hollywood so I can go eat at my favorite restaurant?" Which happened to be Chinese. And just as an aside, when the parents took him to a Chinese restaurant for the very first time, they were stunned by how adept he was at using chopsticks. He didn't have to learn. He didn't have that, like if I tried to use chopsticks, I wouldn't be able to do it. Okay, so that's just sort of an aside. Sometimes he complained that the house was just too small, that he had a great big house with a swimming pool and he wanted to go back there. How can you expect me to live in these conditions? And Mom, don't you know that life with hired help is a lot easier? He even one time wanted to pay his mother to clean his room. He probably was told, "Go clean your room," and he goes, "Well, what if I give you $10? Will you do it?" Now, Ryan didn't just neutrally remember these past life memories. He was emotionally connected to them, and he lived them. He wanted to do the things that he used to do. At family gatherings, he would gather all the children and start directing them in a movie. And he would get really mad at the adults for not helping, and he would say things like, "Don't you understand how hard it is to act and direct a movie at the same time?" He would hum show tunes and start to tap dance, wanted to have tap shoes, and he talked about dancing on stage with his sister in New York City. These are the kinds of memories that began to surface. And he, let's see, still want to, yeah, he also really cried for agent clothes. He wanted agent clothes. What are agent clothes? Well, suits and ties and dress shirts, things that, little boys, it's not really appropriate to dress little boys in to go play on the school playground, right? But that's how he wanted to dress. So it's very interesting to hear his memories, but I think it's even more interesting to listen to his insights. He said something that I found so profound and so poignant. One evening, Cindy was getting him ready for bed, and she told him, quote, this is from her account, "Ryan, do you know that you are not that man in the picture anymore? Or you do know, Ryan, you do know that you're not that man in the picture anymore. We just want you to be Ryan." And Ryan's reply, I found a little bit chilling. He said, "Mom, you still don't get it, do you? I am not the same as the man in the picture on the outside, but I am still that man. You can't see the inside that I see." Now stop for a minute and imagine. Imagine yourself right now, the person you are sitting in the chairs, me standing here, the person that you are, and you wake up and you're in the body of a child in the future, in a different location, with people you've learned that you call them mommy, but they don't feel like your mommy. They don't feel like the people that you're used to. How would that feel like? That would be pretty hard to cope with, wouldn't it? I mean, I can't imagine me, Claire, with 3 grown children, and now I'm a child again. It would just be. It would take some getting used to. And especially if you're in a family that shuts you up, that says, stop talking crazy. Of course you weren't, a 70-year-old woman. You're a little girl, for crying out loud. I mean, that kind of stuff. It would be really, really difficult. Now, Ryan was the subject of 2 different documentaries. And the first documentary was a disaster. The production company was sure that they had found the right previous personality, but they hadn't. They had the wrong guy. And they paid to fly Ryan and his mom and dad out to Hollywood to film him walking around in locations that were associated with the wrong previous personality. Now, interestingly, and I think this lends a lot of credibility to Ryan, he had no reaction to these locations. He didn't remember any of it. He didn't claim to remember any of it. He didn't pretend to remember. He just said, "So? Doesn't mean anything to me." So they came home pretty depressed and discouraged because they had gotten really excited that this was going to give him maybe some resolution. So I give them a lot of credit. When Dr. Tucker called them and asked them if they would consider a second filming from a different production crew, they listened. And Dr. Tucker was pretty confident that they had found the right previous personality this time. The company that was doing the documentary had hired a Hollywood historian and archivist, and she really went to work, and she was able to find a separate picture that was pretty clearly the extra in that photograph that Ryan identified himself in. And on the back was the person's name. So, enter Dr. Tucker into the Hammond home with a film crew, and he begins testing Ryan. Now again, Dr. Tucker is a very mild-mannered man. Children, I'm sure, warm up to him very quickly. He's soft-spoken, he's very kind. And Ryan worked with him very well. The first thing Dr. Tucker did was he laid in front of, they were sitting at a table, and he laid in front of them 4 pictures that looked similar, but with clearly different women. And Dr. Tucker asked him, do any of these people look familiar? And without hesitation, Ryan points to this one picture, and that was the picture of one of his wives, of the previous personality's wives. This went on for another round. He was looking at other people who were in the previous personality's life. Now, they didn't describe all of the tests, but I got the impression that there were 3 or 4 more of those kinds of tests. And then they had a picture of the previous personality at a much younger age than when that picture was taken in Night After Night. So he didn't look the same, but he was still that guy. And Ryan successfully pointed him out with decoy pictures around. So it wasn't just yes or no, but it was which one of these looks familiar. The final test, Dr. Tucker said, I'm going to say 4 names and tell me if any of these sound familiar. So here are the 4 names: John Johnson, Willie Wilson, Marty Martin, and Robert Robertson. Without hesitation, little Ryan says, Marty Martin. And it turns out that that is the previous personality. Marty Martin had started his career in Hollywood as an extra and a bit player, actor, but quickly changed his occupation to talent agent. He had a talent agency, and one of the things that Ryan had said is, I work in an agency where they change people's names. That's what they do in talent agencies, right? And he had become phenomenally successful, was wealthy, had many wives, had a big house with a swimming pool, 3 boys that weren't his, but he gave his name to, all of those things. So they had the previous personality identified, and Ryan nailed all the tests. Now there's even more details, but for time's sake, I'm going to move on. But I just want to let you know that Ryan made a total of 55 statements about Marty Martin that were verified to be correct. Now, I won't test your statistical ability and ask you to calculate the probability, but I will tell you that that is a very low probability that that could happen by chance. So as we bring this to a close, I want to take us back to the materialist hypothesis versus the non-local hypothesis. How can a materialist hypothesis that says our consciousness, who we are, our personality is in the brain, when we have total disconnect between one life and one brain and this other life halfway across the country with another brain? I mean, that's the materialist hypothesis cannot handle this kind of finding, but the non-local one can. So it's just I just want to kind of bring us back to that, to think about it. Okay. Watching my time, I've taken almost an hour to talk about that. So I'm going to scream past the next part. Okay. I've lost my place. Okay. The next line of evidence is near-death experiences. And I know that most people are pretty familiar with near-death experiences, and so I feel like if I'm going to give short shrift to any one of these lines of evidence, this is the one I will kind of speed through. In the lingo of the research, the near-death experience is called an NDE. The person who has had the near-death experience is called an NDEer. And I want to just draw your attention to the fact that there's this website, it's the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation website, or NDERF.org. And they have been a website that was established in 1998 by Dr. Jeffrey Long, who's an MD. And it's a site where people all over the world can submit their near-death experiences. They have an extensive survey that the person fills out, and then they have opportunity to provide a narrative with more words describe what they experienced. And because of that database, there's now in the first 10 years, there was over 1,300 submissions to this website, and they're able to, again, find patterns. They can look for patterns across the different experiences. Now, with near-death experiences, there are various common elements. No one NDE is likely to have all of these elements. But when you look at thousands of cases, you'll find that many of them have what we would call an out-of-body experience, where there was a disconnect of their conscious awareness, that part of them that felt like it's me, and was no longer looking out of the eyes of the body, but looking at the body from the ceiling or other places. In the NDE, their senses feel heightened. Their vision is crisper and clearer than their vision in the body. Their hearing, their smell, everything is sharper. It's more vibrant. It's realer than what feels real here. They experience intense and generally positive emotions. They pass through a tunnel. Many people describe having entered a tunnel and passing through a tunnel toward a light and encountering that mystical or brilliant light, which many people call God. They encounter beings. Sometimes these are mystical beings, but most often it's a deceased loved one. It's usually someone from the family, although it can be a friend. They have a sense of altered time and space, so it might feel like they're in this NDE experience for hours, if not days, and then they come back and find that they were only unconscious or dead for 20 minutes. So the sense of time has changed. Many people report having a life review. How many people are familiar with the life review? Okay, so you know what this is about. You see your life unfold before your eyes, oftentimes like on a movie screen, but sometimes as if you're living it. And you not only experience it from your point of view, but you experience it from the other person's point of view. What did it feel like to my son when I was haranguing him about being late for school? What did he feel like? People encounter unworldly heavenly realms where they talk about, again, the colors being vibrant. As they walked by flowers, the flowers would track them, and their scent was filled with love. I mean, it's just a very different atmosphere and realm. They encounter or learn special knowledge. Sometimes they're given information about the future. Sometimes they're given information about what their life will be like if they return. Another frequent element of the NDE is encountering a barrier or a boundary, where they're told you cannot come any farther or you can't go back. Many people report not wanting to come back, but being told it's not your time, you must come back. And then a return to the body either voluntarily or involuntarily. One woman who described her NDE did not want to come back, and she wasn't going to come back. And her uncle pushed her. Whoa. Now, what they describe as they're looking at this body is the body's actually kind of repulsive. They don't want it. That's like, ew. They don't have any emotional connection to this body that they recognize was their body. But the thought of going back into that body after being so expansive and free and this heightened sense of clarity, it's like, why would I want to do that? You know? And so sometimes people are involuntarily put back into their body. Okay. Oh, did I break this? Help, Kelly, can you move it? Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, this is the one I wanted to skip because we are out of time. Okay, so I want to take a look at 3 aspects of the near-death experience that I find just particularly interesting. And the first one is the out-of-body experience. I also want to mention that you don't have to have a near-death experience to have an out-of-body experience. Has anybody had an out-of-body experience that's willing to admit it? Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's possible to do it. In fact, I have a book that I can't wait to read. It's called Demystifying the Out-of-Body Experience, and it's basically a textbook that teaches you how to do it. I can't wait. I haven't done it yet. Anyway, that'll be the next class. Claire teaches you to do out-of-body experiences. Okay, with the out-of-body experience, we have people, again, that no longer feel like they're looking out of their eyes. They're at some distant location looking down at their body. In many cases, they're observing the earthly events that are going on, such as being resuscitated. You know, we've got nurses and doctors, and they're calling for this, and they're bringing that, that, and they're watching, they're working on this body that they know is their body, but they understand that they're up in the ceiling. Okay. This is a really important piece of evidence, I think, for the reality of near-death experiences, because often things that the person sees while out of body would not be available for them to see were they in their body, and it can be validated. So now one of the most famous cases took place in Seattle, and it was a woman named Maria who was brought into ER under cardiac arrest. She was not breathing, her heart was not beating, and they worked for a long time before they got her revived. And when she came back into her body and was conscious again, she began talking about her experience. She had some of the near-death experience components, but what was really interesting is she was able to describe the resuscitation efforts, but then she found herself outside the hospital, floating outside a third-story window. So she's outside of the hospital looking at a window, and on the windowsill was a man's tennis shoe, blue. The shoelace was coiled around and under the heel, and the toe was worn, the small toe, where the small toe would be, was worn. And this was not even visible, that wearing of the small toe spot was not even visible from inside the hospital room. You could only see it if you were looking at it from outside looking in. She was adamant that she saw this. So one of the staff members started looking. And they looked at every window in the third floor, and they found it. A male's tennis shoe, blue, shoelace just as she described, and the worn baby toe spot on the shoe. How do you explain that one with a materialist hypothesis? The non-local one gets a point for that one too. In another pretty famous case, but it's kind of so dramatic that people can't stop talking about it, and this was a man who had stopped breathing, and they needed to ventilate him, and he had dentures. So they took the dentures out, and they put them in the drawer of a crash cart. Well, by this time, he was out of his body, and he saw all that. And a week later, they still hadn't found his dentures. And he told them where to find them. He told them everything about the resuscitation efforts, who was there, and said, and you put my dentures in the drawer. And they found his dentures. So, okay, I'm going to speed up here. So out-of-body experiences are very interesting, and they're very validating that what the person reports is real. Now, NDEs reported by very young children. The NDERF organization mined their data and identified very young children, like 5 years old and younger, and looked at their accounts of their NDEs, and they found that the same elements that are in the older children and adult accounts are found in the very young. Why is this important? Well, one of the claims that skeptics make is that, well, you know, we've been talking about NDEs. Oprah talks about NDEs all the time. People know about this. They know what to expect. They think that if they have a cardiac arrest, that that's what they're going to experience, and so that's what they report. Well, it's very unlikely that children are going to have an extensive knowledge of the components of an NDE. And by the way, on the survey on the NDERF website, they specifically ask, did you have knowledge of what an NDE was like prior to your experience? And 66% of the people say no. And then finally, life changes. They find that, you know, that people who experience near-death experiences are changed forever. And often these changes do not occur immediately, but the changes occur as they integrate this experience into their lives. So it might be 3, 4, 5 years later that they really anchor those changes. What are the changes that they make? Their changes are moving from perhaps a very driven existence where everything is about money and climbing the ladder and being successful, to now valuing human relationships, love, the things that we know matter in life. So that's one of the changes that takes place. Sometimes there are dramatic healings that take place right away or within weeks or months of the event. How many of you are familiar with Anita Moorjani's book, Dying to Be Me? If you're interested in this, she wrote an amazing book where she was dying and dead of stage 4 cancer. She was rushed to the hospital, had this amazing near-death experience, and she was told during the experience that she would be healed. And when she came back, the healing process began, and within weeks or months, the doctors could not believe that she had been restored to health. So healings can take place. Oftentimes people come back with enhanced psychic abilities. And certainly they come back with an increased belief in the afterlife. Kelly, if you could give me a hand here, thank you. Let's take a break. So we'll take a 10-minute break. I see it's 10 after 7. We'll come back at 20 after. Do you want to what?
Just mention that there's a basket.
Oh, okay. You want me to do that now? Or when we come back? Okay. How are you? try it again. Kelly, I'll need a hand with a slide. Thank you. What was that? No, I dropped it. I'm sorry. Since I flew it.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about our third line of evidence, which is in the general category is called after-death communication. And of course, researchers love to categorize things and give them fancy names. So the first category of after-death communication is called spontaneous after-death communication. And this you might recognize as signs from loved ones or visitation dreams or sensing the presence of the loved one. Now, I bet if we asked for a row of hands, how many of you have a deceased loved one and they came to you in a dream? Yeah. Or you had a sense that they were present with you. And how about a sign? I keep asking my deceased husband, Jay, to flicker the lights. Come on. Show me that you're here. Okay, so there's just, we could spend a half hour or more talking about these. They're fascinating, but I want to move on to other things. Then there's the fancy title of the category, requested after-death communication using protocols to facilitate the event. This could be automatic writing. This could be doing a guided meditation where you're put into a receptive state and you begin writing down what you think you're hearing your loved one say or communicate to you. These are not easy to validate. Sometimes in automatic writing, there will be something that comes through that later comes true, so some way of validating, but it's not particularly easy to study. The last category is called assisted after-death communication, and what they really want to say is mediumship. Mediumship is that art or practice of someone who has learned how to put themselves in a state where spirit can come through and give them information about themselves. It's a loved one. It's this, I'm going to call it the spirit person. The spirit person comes into the medium's energy field and begins to provide information which the medium then relays to the person before them. And they call that, in the lingo of the field, they call that the sitter. So if I'm a medium, I'm talking to a spirit person and I'm giving information to the sitter, the person who's connected to the deceased loved one. Okay, next slide. So I just kind of talked about what mediumship is. It's connecting with loved ones who are departed. It can also be pets. Pets can come through. And they can come through very, very clearly and communicate things like things that they like to do when they were in form, or things about what they expected of their person or whatever. Now, in the field of mediumship, there is the potential for bad stuff, fraud, people taking advantage of someone in grief. And so in the field, these are known as hot or cold readings. A hot reading is one where the purported medium has looked up information about the sitter ahead of time and then pretends to be feeding the sitter this information as if it was from the loved one, and it's not at all. They're just providing information that they got on social media or the internet. In a cold reading, someone is very adept at watching the sitter and cueing in on when the sitter kind of gets excited about something, and then they keep going. So they say a whole bunch of stuff really fast, and they watch which things seem to stick. Did you get it?
There's a little switch on the side of it. I was changing batteries and doing everything. There's a switch on the side.
Okay, that's what got knocked off when I threw it. Okay, so in cold readings, it's not a true mediumship reading. It's just someone who's very adept at reading other people. They're reading the sitter not getting information from the spirit person. In evidential mediumship, which is the kind of mediumship I've been studying, you are taught to open your energy field to a spirit person and begin sensing and feeling and hearing and sometimes seeing what that spirit person is communicating. And I'm going to talk more about that at the end, but I just wanted to, that's called evidential mental mediumship. There's other kinds of mediums, but I'm going to, for time's sake, leave that alone. Now, I'm really impressed with the Windbridge Research Center. You can find it online. I think it's windbridge.org. If you just Google actually, by the way, I have some copies of the bibliography for tonight's talk and some suggested readings if you want to dive deeper. But just be aware that it's a 2-page list, and it's not double-sided. So make sure you get page 1 and page 2. Okay, but they're up here at this table. Anyway, Dr. Julie Beischel is the Director of Research at the Windbridge Research Institute. She has a PhD in pharmacology and toxicology. Now, why would that be relevant? The relevance is that she is extremely knowledgeable about scientific methods, scientific protocol, how to conduct blind studies. If you've heard about the idea of blind studies where the experimenter doesn't know who's who in terms of the subjects. And that's important because sometimes experimenters can cue subjects about what they're expecting. And subjects are often willing to comply, oftentimes unconsciously. Okay, so don't get scared by this. The science geek in me I had to show it to you. This is the protocol that the Windbridge Institute has come up with for their scientific investigations of mediums. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go through this. If this isn't your cup of tea, it'll only take me about 2 minutes. Okay, so the way this begins, on day 1, which is on the left at the top, a medium gets on the phone with an experimenter. The experimenter has no idea who the sitter is, but the sitter has previously provided the name of someone deceased, someone in spirit, that's close to them. So the experimenter tells the medium, you are to contact so-and-so. The medium does not know who the sitter is. All they are given is a name of someone in spirit. Then, the next day, they do it all over again with a different sitter, a different name. So that's day 2. Then the reading, the information that the medium provides, is put into a transcript form and formatted in the same ways. So there's now reading 1 for the first day and reading 2 on the second day. And the person doing the transcription doesn't know anything about the sitter, doesn't know anything about the discarnate being, the person in spirit that was contacted. They're just taking the recording and putting it into transcript form. Now, we have 2 sitters, we have 2 discarnate beings, 2 spirit persons, and 2 readings, right? Each sitter is given both transcripts. They're given the transcript from day 1 and the transcript from day 2. Are you with me? Why would they do that? Well, the transcript that matches the sitter is the target transcript. The other one is the decoy. The sitter doesn't know which reading was for them and which reading was for somebody else. So they go through and they score the accuracy of these transcripts for the discarnate being, for the spirit person that they had identified. Pretty cool. I mean, the science geek in me thinks, wow, this is like a 5-level blind study. So both sitters are asked to identify the accuracy of the statements, and then they're asked to say which one of these transcripts is your person. And they're accurate 66% of the time, which is better than 1 in 100 out of 100 chance. The other finding is that The sitter scores for the target reading are statistically significantly higher than the decoy reading, with a probability of less than 1 in 1,000. So that's pretty darn good for social science research. I also want to mention that this protocol is terrible for doing readings. I mean, what I've been taught is that the energy that transpires between the medium and the sitter and the spirit person, it builds the energy and makes the communication clearer. To be on the other end of a phone and just being given a name and come up with anything that's accurate, to me, is absolutely astonishing. Another research group that's studying mediumship in a very scientifically sound way is Gary Schwartz and his research center at the University of Arizona. And for time's sake, I'm not going to talk about his, but he also has just very carefully designed studies that are showing accuracy of statements like at this 80-90%. Now he's dealing with very top-notch mediums like John Edwards and Suzanne Giesman and people who are just the cream of the crop when it comes to mediums. Okay, so I thought it might be interesting for you to listen or hear some of my personal experiences in mediumship. My first experience with a medium occurred a few months after my mother passed away. My mother died on Christmas Eve 2016, and in March I signed up for a mediumship demonstration through Sierra College with medium Francesca Kimpton. She comes up here, I think, every year, and she does this. So I'm in a auditorium. There's probably 100 or 125 of us, and she begins her demonstration. And basically, she just starts telling. She'd kind of like go up to Karen and say, I think I have someone for you. And she starts describing somebody, and you say, yes, I understand, or no. And about halfway or half hour into her demonstration, she walked up to where I was sitting, and she pointed to me and she goes, it's one of you three. Okay, now I've got to back up. I forgot to tell you the setup part of the story. I got so excited. The setup part of the story was that my mother, I really wanted to hear from my mother. She had just died a few months before. And so I had done a little meditation, and I talked to my mother. I couldn't hear her. I didn't get anything back, but I just said, Mom, I really want to know if you're with Jimmy. Jimmy was her 3-year-old son that passed away, which was a lifelong hurt for her. And I want to know if you talked to your dad. Now, my mom lived well into her 90s, and so the last few years, she was interested in talking about death and what was going to happen afterwards and things. And we would often talk about the people she would see. And I would say, and you'll see your dad. And typical of my mom, she said, I'll punch him in the nose. She had never forgiven him for the fact that he abandoned the family when she was 1 year old. So it was a lifelong hurt for her. So I wanted to know, was she with Jimmy, and had she talked to her father? So Francesca comes up, and she goes, it's one of you three. And she said, I'm seeing a woman with a child in her arms, and that's my symbol for someone who lost a child when they were on Earth. And I said, yeah, that could be my mom. And I felt like that was the first validation. Within 15 seconds, Francesca says this to me. She wants you to know she's talked to her father, and he's explained everything. Unbelievable. I could have fallen on the floor. So, yeah. Oh, and then Francesca goes, oh, your grandfather's stepping in. He is dripping with charm. That was exactly how the family lore was about my grandfather. He was very charismatic. The women loved him, threw themselves at him. And he said, through the medium, yeah, I was young and I didn't know what to do with all that attention, and I got myself in trouble. So he wanted me to understand why he had abandoned his family. Then the next experience wasn't with a medium. It was a personal experience that happened to me. My husband and I were in Hawaii, and we had been out sightseeing all day, and we were driving back to our resort. And my husband was driving, and when I'm sitting in the passenger seat, especially after a long day, it's very, very quickly I start getting that, that nodding feeling and that that place between sleep and awake, that hypnagogic state. So as I'm entering into that state, full blown in my mind, I hear Du bist ein Schnudderguns. And my response was, what? Why would I think that? But my next response was, Grandma? Because you see, my German grandmother used to say that to me when I was a little girl. Du bist ein Schnudderguns. That means you are a chatterbox. Okay, so, some things don't change. Okay, so your grandmother said that to you too? Yes. Oh my gosh. So, so when I said Grandma, the next thing I heard was, oh, you heard me. And we proceeded to have a totally silent but internal conversation, back and forth. I didn't hear word as a sentence. I just got a thought fully formed in my mind. And then I would respond to her, and she would respond back. And it was a completely healing, wonderful conversation. If we had more time, I would tell you why it was so healing, but leave that for another day. Okay. But that's what made me start to think, well, maybe I can do this. Maybe if I take classes, I could learn to do this, because I had that experience. So I began working with a teacher from Southern California. His name is Michael Mayo. And by the way, he has agreed to come to Unity in the Gold Country in September. And he's going to do a demonstration on Friday night. And he's going to do a workshop all day Saturday. And he is going to do a healing demonstration and workshop on Sunday. I'm really excited because this guy is, I just love him. He's so effective as a teacher, he's knowledgeable, and he's just a really kind, wonderful guy. Anyway, I learned about Michael Mayo in a funny way. I had gone to the psychic fair in Nevada City, and I was talking to one of the gals that had a little sign up saying, she was an evidential medium, and so I kind of wanted to pick her brain. I hadn't started studying really yet, and I said, so where did you learn to do this? And she goes, I've been taking classes with a guy from Southern California named Michael Mayo. Okay, well, that's as far as it went for me, until the next day, I get an email from the Shift Network, Foundation 1 mediumship class with Michael Mayo. And I thought, okay, universe, I will follow up, and I'm so glad that I did. And as a result of taking classes with him, and my mediumship began to develop. And of course, you're taking classes with other students, and you want to practice, so you practice with other students, because other students know just how kind of terrifying it is to do it, because you're so vulnerable. You have to say things, you have no idea what it means, you have no idea if it's right, but you say them. But another student understands that. So we did a lot of trading of readings with other students. And I got paired up with this wonderful young woman from Spain. Her name was Nanda. And I talked to her today and I said, do you mind if I share this? And she goes, absolutely not, go for it. Nanda is a wonderful young woman. And at the time we were exchanging readings, she was actually in Argentina. Normally she was in Spain, but on that day, isn't Zoom great? We can hook up with people all over the world. She was in Argentina visiting her mom. And I knew that. So it was my turn to give her the reading. It was really, I hardly ever remember the details of a reading after I give it. But this one just really sticks out for me. I remember it very, very clearly. The connection with the spirit person was very clear and very strong, and I began describing her. I said, this woman looks a lot like you, Nina. She's small and she's petite. She's slight of frame like you are, and she actually looks a little bit like you. And she took care of you when you were a little girl, and she didn't just put you in the corner with the toy, she took you on adventures. I said, do you understand that, Nanda? No, I don't know who that would be. And I said, well, let me go back, because the communication, normally if I start getting no's, it kind of shuts me down. But I just said, well, let me try some more. And I got this fleeting image of a woman in a tango dress. You know. And I thought, okay, Claire, you know she's in Argentina. Your mind is filling in the blanks with tango, right? But you're taught to say it anyway. And I said, I feel like she was a tango dancer. I'm seeing her, and she's very powerful and strong, and she's a performer. And Nanda's going, no, I can't take that. I don't know who that is. So, okay, well, let me try again. And then I got that she died as a relatively young age, and that, I mean, not like 20s or 30s, but 60s, of breast cancer. And Nanda's going, gosh, Claire, I'm sorry, I just don't know who this is. And we went on, and maybe there were a few other things, I don't remember, but at the very end of the reading, it hit me. The communicator was probably, doing this. I said, Nanda, this isn't for you, it's for your mother. The spirit person was there to communicate and wanted to contact the mother. So she goes, well, I'll check it out with my mom. Well, the next day, I get this excited voicemail. Claire, you were right. It was my mother's aunt, and I think I got the name Anne, and her name was Anita. She said it was Anita. She was a tango dancer. She took care of my mother and took her on adventures. She died of breast cancer in her 60s. I mean, it was just like everything matched. And she said, when I told my mom just started crying. She loved this aunt so much. And my mom said, yes, I've told you often, she looked like you. You looked like her. So that was just an amazing experience to have such a clear connection and get that kind of information. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to share that is that one of the alternative hypotheses to the explanation that mediums are talking to spirit people, an alternative explanation is that you're not really talking to someone who's died, you're reading the sitter's mind. So like if you're in front of a sitter who is thinking about their deceased husband and really wants to talk to their deceased husband, and they're thinking about the kinds of things he did and who he was, if you're good at psychically, telepathically reading somebody, then that's how you're getting the information. Well, in this case, Nanda did not know any of this. So it kind of rules out those, and that's not the first. There are many cases of documented mediumship readings where the sitter did not know who the person was. I know of one case where the woman kept saying, no, 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 I don't know who this is. She went home and told her husband, and everything fit his father. So I think the psychic reading part is not, does not hold water. Okay. I wanted to tell you a little bit about what it feels like to be the medium, okay? And remember, I should have said this up front, I still consider myself very much a student. I mean, I've only been doing this 2.5 years, and I wasn't somebody who, saw spirits and communicated with spirits from a child on. This has been a very slow developing process, and I'm still developing. But where I stand now, I can tell you what it feels like, okay? The first thing that you're taught is to understand what your own energy field feels like. So most of us, without this kind of coaching, we pretty much live in our heads, and some people are just like not aware of their feet, they're not aware of their stomach, they're just aware of what's between their ears. So you start to learn to move your awareness to different places, right? You can move your awareness from your mind to your heart, to your gut, to your legs. Move your awareness through your body. I'm sure all of you can do that. And then you begin to focus on the heart space. And in the lingo of the mediumship practice that I do, that is where your divine spark resides. And you begin through intention, and in energy work, anything doing with the energy, it's all intention. It's not effort, it's intention. You begin to invite that spark, that divine light, to expand and fill the body. So now you put your awareness at the boundaries of the body. And then you allow or you welcome the divine light to go beyond the body. And it takes a while, but pretty soon you begin to feel the atmosphere around you as if it's an extension of you. And the atmosphere between your body and your boundary begins to thicken. And you begin to have sensations like tingling or warmth, or everybody experiences it slightly differently. For me, it's kind of a bubbling feeling. And then you expand even further so that your awareness is 3, 4, 5 feet beyond your body. And they encourage you to go as big as the room that you're sitting in. But he says it's not so important that you do that, but just that you're expanding your awareness so that you're feeling all around you. Then you start to notice what changes. So as I open up to do a mediumship reading, and I have a little spiel, and I invite the spirit person of the sitter to come in, I experience a change in the energy around me, and it's so hard to put into words, but it's almost, you know the sound that Velcro makes? It's that feeling. Okay, what would that feel like? But it's kind of a sparkling, it's a sparky, it enters, and the spirit people feel different. Some people come in and they're very soft energy, they're very gentle, they're timid. The energy sort of just starts to slowly come into your space. I did a reading a week or so ago, and the spirit woman about bowled me over. I mean, she came in so hard and so fast and so strong. She even had me gesturing, which I'd never done before. It was like, and the sitters, it was a mother and daughter, the sitters went, "Oh my God, that's Grandma." But she was very clear, she was very powerful. So her energy actually felt different as it came into my field. And then you learn to keep your focus not on the sitter at all. In fact, I tend to keep my eyes closed because that's where I can do what they call a soft focus. If you narrow your focus and try, which has been my MO my whole life, is strive, 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 achieve, 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 that works against you. You have to be soft. You have to be open. You have to receive. You can't go out and get. You have to receive. And stay soft focused. So when I'm finding that I'm starting to the information is not flowing anymore in a reading, I remind myself, okay, soft focus, broaden your focus. Get your attention out here, not here. So you start to learn to pay attention to very subtle but fleeting sensations or information. I mean, I'll tell you what, it's so subtle and it's so fast. They're like, okay, in this reading with this woman, I kept getting the idea of teddy bears, and I thought, oh, come on, this powerful, strong woman and teddy bears? No, that's probably my mind. But one of the things that we've been taught is that if the answer is right, you will feel a surge in the power. And that surge in the power is like kind of fills in that atmosphere around you, and it's palpable. It thickens and it's palpable. So I kind of tested it out. Now that's not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to just say it, but I sort of held it back and tested it, and I felt the power increase a little. So I thought, okay, I'm going to say teddy bears. And sure enough, this woman had a collection of teddy bears. They even played the music Teddy Bear Picnic at her memorial service. So the other thing that you have to learn to do is to distinguish between what the spirit person is giving you and what your mind wants to fill in. because your mind is so anxious to jump in and be part of this. And so the teacher, Michael, will say, Claire, you're listening to your reading again. And what he means by that is like, I'll bring in a piece of information and like, this person was very intelligent. Would you understand that? And the sitter says yes. Well, now I think, okay, they're intelligent, that means they're educated. So, oh yeah, this person has a degree. No. That was my mind trying to make sense out of the information that came through and then spin the story. And that's what it really took me quite a while to learn. I'm still learning how to not do that. So don't listen to your own reading. And spirit is very creative, and so one of the things you have to do is learn to think flexibly. For example, once I was giving a reading, and this woman, it was another student, and we were pretty sure that she knew who it was. It was someone that she recognized from her past. And so then I got the impression of Chicago. So I told her that, and she said, no, I can't make a connection between this person and Chicago. So I said, okay, well, let me just kind of relax back into that and see if anything else comes. And what came was, oh, it's not the location Chicago, it was the musical Chicago. So you have to think flexibly. And sometimes the information that comes in is not have anything to do with the person, the deceased spirit person, but it has to do with something that happened in the sitter's life. And I have a wonderful example of this, and then I'll stop and we'll go into a little bit of a discussion. I think I mentioned my husband is deceased, and he died last September. And some friends of ours from Southern California had come up to visit me, and they'd been there for a few days, and it was the last morning that they were there, and we were standing around the kitchen talking about Jay, and I said, you know, I haven't had any problem giving away his clothes or clearing out his closet. That was easy for me, but I can't take his wallet out of the cupboard. He had his wallet in a special cupboard. It was on the way out to the garage, and he would grab the wallet, grab his keys, and head out the door. And I just, for some reason, that just doesn't feel right to remove that wallet. So I was in class, and we were exchanging readings with other students, and I was pretty sure that Jay had come through. And then she said, he's showing me a wallet. And she was listening to her reading because she started telling me about how proud he was of this wallet, that it was a very special wallet and everything. And I said, no, that's not right, but the wallet is significant. It was his way of communicating that he was there with us. He heard the conversation about the wallet. So the spirit is very creative in the way they work. And in mediumship readings, if you ever go to a medium, I would say make sure that it's someone who's reputable, that you know that you can trust, because there are mediums out there that do take advantage of people. They're not really mediums, they're just people taking it. And sometimes I think that they have some ability, but they don't rely on them. They're not confident in themselves, so they rely on other means. But that's mediumship, and I would be delighted to open it up for discussion. I have one last slide. What do you make of all this? What are your thoughts? Or do you have any questions?
Well, we're being recorded, honey. So you've got
Oh, I just had a question. You were talking about how the kids were talking about being reincarnated within so many years, but then if you're trying to connect to these people as a medium, what if they're already reincarnated
Okay,
into another
so
body?
I think did everybody hear that if children are reincarnating so quickly, and you're a medium trying to reincarnate with someone that died 10 years ago, how does that work? Well, I have two thoughts about that. One is that in these in the DOPS database, 70% of those children died unnatural causes. And we don't know if that is why they reincarnated so quickly or not. I mean, that's kind of an unanswered question. My other thought about that is that, and this is not from research, this is not academic, this is just Claire thinking about it. I think our consciousness has many aspects and many levels. And so the way I think about reincarnation is this. It's kind of like an actor that takes many roles. So if you think about Tom Hanks, he's been in so many different movies, so many roles. He's been the guy in Splash, he's been Forrest Gump, he's been Walt Disney in that movie about Mary Poppins. I mean, he's taken on these widely different roles. He's lived many lives through his acting career, yeah? And so the constant is the person Tom Hanks. So when it comes to reincarnation, I think we have this eternal soul that is the one that incarnates, but it's only part of them. Only part of the consciousness actually embodies. And so it would be possible, I think, for someone to die in 1970, reincarnate in 1980, but have their loved one have a mediumship reading in 1985, because the through line of the lives is still aware, is still knowledgeable, still an aspect. That personality is still an aspect of that consciousness. Does that make sense? Yeah. That's how I think about it. Anything else? Yes?
What are your thoughts? I read a book about life between lives. What are your thoughts about where we go in between our lives? I read a book, Life Between Lives. Can't remember the author, but it was
I
good.
can't remember the author either, but
Did you
yeah.
read that?
Was that Michael Newton's book?
that was him, yeah.
Michael Newton? Yeah. Well, I believe there's life between lives. Michael Newton's work is very, very interesting. He did this through hypnotic regression, and there was a time when I disbelieved hypnotic regression. I thought it was all just suggestion. But after reading The Life Before Life and The Return to Life, I became convinced that this was in fact something that happens. And so now that I'm more willing to agree to, or to accept the credibility of hypnotic regressions. Patricia Haller gave me a hypnotic regression once, and it was quite interesting. I was really amazed at what came through. So where do we go in between lives? Your guess is as good as mine. I mean, certainly the reports are wonderful and beautiful, that you're released from all fear. I really think that we are lifted into a higher frequency. The earth plane frequency is very dense and filled with the lower frequency emotions of fear and all the children of fear, like judgment and greed and all the stuff that doesn't feel good. That's, well, when we're here we say that, but when we're there we're going, yes, I want to experience that. I want to see if I can overcome it this time. I really do think that we have planned lives. Michael Newton his books talk about lives that get planned, and that you have certain things that you choose that you will experience. And that makes sense to me. Yeah. Well, yes.
Just a question about the statistics about, if I understand it correctly, basically girls who remember their past lives, it's more kind of even in terms of natural versus unnatural deaths, whereas boys, it's like much more overwhelmingly unnatural deaths. Does that, am I understanding that to mean basically that like people tend to reincarnate as the same gender, like boys tend to remember lives where they were male and girls tend to remember lives where they were female, or is there like, does there tend to be much like crossover or that kind of thing?
Yeah, according to the books I've read, what I remember is that they said 10% of the cases in the DOPS database are cross, so that the child remembers being a woman but is a boy, or vice versa. And one case that pops out of my mind is kind of a fun one. This woman was a grandmother in the family, And she made statements like, next time I come, I'm going to be a man, because this is not right. You know? And sure enough, the grandson began reporting the grandmother's life, memories from the grandmother's life. And he actually displayed behaviors that were appropriate to a woman. And, you know, it's not every child that is, you know, has remembered a different sex life does that, but it's an interesting account. But yeah, 10%. So most of them are the same sex. But that might be also because it was the traumatic, violent ending for most of these children, that they need to process, they need to experience life in the same gender so that they can remember that life more clearly. I mean, we're in speculation at that point. Yeah. Well, we are at, oh, yes, Michael.
Most of the NDEers say when they feel they're in the disincarnate state, that they're home.
I'm sorry,
Most NDEers say when they come back, that when they were out of the body, they were at home. And they felt like
I didn't understand.
that's where people go maybe between incarnations.
Between incarnations, yeah, it's about, well, the average time in the database is 4.5 years, but the median time is 16 months, so it's very fast.
Another question I have is biblical look at prophecy. God says he would like you to get your information directly from him rather than from dead people.
Well,
So what do you make of that? Have you read about biblical prophecy?
so biblical prophecy?
Yeah, I was wondering about the difference between mediumship and psychics and prophetics, prophets.
Well, some psychics do prophecy. Some mediums will report from the spirit person something that might happen in the sitter's life. So I've never had that happen where I was told something that was going to happen. But some mediums might have that experience, I don't know. But in terms of biblical prophecy, there were mediums in the Bible, and in Jesus' day it was a pretty accepted practice. It's only been in the recent centuries that we have interpreted elsewise.
The Jewish prophets were very much against mediumship and psychics.
Yeah, there's been a very long history of people who do this work being persecuted, burned at the stake, accused to be witches, that kind of thing.
That's why I asked about it, because it's a matter of some concern. You know, it's a mystery to me.
It is a mystery. Yeah, it is a mystery. Yes?
What about when really negative things come up? Do you share that?
Oh, in a mediumship reading, if something negative comes up? So the question is, what happens when negative things come up in a reading? Well, one of the things that we're taught is to choose our words very carefully. That you want to be as gentle in portraying the information as possible. So, for example, one of my very early readings, I got the sense that this woman's mother had been killed, had been murdered. And my way of expressing that was, I feel that her life ended due to unnatural causes. And that was the gentlest way I could think of to portray that information, because you do want to be sensitive to how the information is being received. And if you're wrong, you don't want to be saying something, really harsh and negative and scary. So, yeah. There's also, we're out of time, so I'm going to button up. But I know many of people have already made a donation into the basket, but if you didn't realize it was here, if you'd like to make a free will donation, the basket's here. And I just wanted to personally thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this passion of mine about the lines of evidence that support the hypothesis that we continue on after death, and we were alive and conscious before we're born. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just FYI, Claire mentioned about Michael Mayo coming. We're working on that for Friday the 27th, Saturday the 28th, and Sunday the 29th of September. The details are not like totally...
It's not nailed down yet.
It's not nailed
but
down yet, but we're pretty sure that it'll be happening. So you can always call Unity or keep an eye out on the e-bulletin if you get that. So thank you, everybody, for being here, for not staying home to watch the opening of the Olympics. But we have our own gold medal Olympian,
Aw.
Claire Palmerino. That was
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you.